Good evening, everyone. I am indeed Dustin DeBoer, and I am so glad that you have joined me tonight because I want to take you on a journey that will change how you see America forever. As you know, as a Constitution coach and a leadership consultant, I spend a lot of time studying what makes a person or a leader really tick. Matter of fact, great leaders I love studying because I analyze personality types through the DISC assessment. I help people discover their purpose, and I work with them and with families, so individuals and families and or businesses, to build strong foundations. But nothing, and I mean nothing, has impressed me more than studying the 56 signers who signed the Declaration of Independence. Tonight, I want to share with you something that most Americans, I think, have never really thought about. Something that will help you to understand why we're the freest, most prosperous nation in human history, and why we're in danger of actually losing it. Now, what did all 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence have in common? Picture this for a moment. 56 men on July 4th, 1776, Independence Hall in Philadelphia. These were not your cookie cutter politicians. They were completely different worlds that came together when they came to Philadelphia. John Hancock, the wealthiest man in Massachusetts, a merchant prince who could buy and sell literally small countries. And then you have George Taylor, a former indentured servant who had literally been in bondage. You have Benjamin Franklin, the most famous American alive, known worldwide as a scientist and diplomat. Then you have Button Gwinnett, a relative unknown from the frontier of Georgia. Then you have Charles Carroll, a Catholic in a Protestant world, but the richest man in all of America. Then you have John Hart, a simple farmer known as Honest John. Again, they were from different regions, different religions, different world and wealth levels, and truly different personalities. 24 were lawyers, 11 of them were merchants, 9 were farmers and plantation owners. Some were young firebrands, while others were seasoned statesmen. Some were Congregationalists, others Anglicans. Some were Catholics, and, well, there were maybe a couple of deists in there. So what did they all have in common? It surely wasn't their wealth. Some were rich, others were very modest. Was it their education? No. Some were Harvard trained, others were self-taught. Was it their age? Edward Rutledge was 26, and Benjamin Franklin, the elder statesman, he was 70. But here's what every single one of them shared: sacrificial commitment. Every single one of them pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Now, when we hear those words so often, they almost seem like they lose their meaning. But friends, this wasn't political rhetoric. This was prophecy. Think about what they're actually saying. Their lives. We're willing to die for this. Their fortunes. We'll give up everything we have that we own. Sacred honor. Our word is our bond before God and man. They weren't just signing a document. They were entering into a blood covenant. They knew that if they were captured, they faced the worst possible death, being hung, drawn, and even quartered. Ew. Doesn't sound pleasant at all to me. Their families, they'd be left homeless and destitute. Their property would be forfeited. But they signed it anyway. This is what I call sacrificial commitment. And that's what made America possible. Not speeches, not theories, not political maneuvering. And boy, do we see that today. It was literal sacrifice. Every single one of those 56 men that signed it demonstrated this characteristic. It was universal amongst them. It was the defining trait that separated them from every other group of men in history. But here's the question that keeps me up at night. What enabled such sacrifice and sacrificial commitment? What kind of men voluntarily pledge everything they have for abstract principles? Or maybe they weren't such abstract principles. But there are 6 principles that seem to make this sacrificial commitment inevitable. I want to share those 6 principles that work together to create a worldview where sacrificial commitment wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. The first one being a transcendent purpose. And that's why I love helping people find a transcendent purpose to their lives. Our forefathers believed some causes are bigger than the individual life. The Declaration doesn't appeal to King George or to Parliament. It appeals to the divine providence and the supreme judge of the world. They acknowledged a higher authority than human government and fought for unalienable rights that transcended personal interest. If our founding fathers of this country did that, why don't we? Number 2, they believed in moral absolutes, in unchanging right and wrong that supersedes convenience. We hold these truths to be self-evidence. Notice it doesn't say we think or we believe. These were absolutes, not relative truths. Most of our founding fathers were practicing Christians with a biblical worldview that gave them the unchanging moral standards. That is an undoubtable truth, that most of them were Christians and that they believed in moral absolutes. Why don't we? Conventional thinking. The founding fathers also understood that some commitments are binding regardless of cost. The phrase sacred honor wasn't casual language. It was covenant language. Their religious background taught them that when you give your word before God, it's unbreakable, period. Fourth, they had a legacy consciousness. Their actions were guided by impact on future generations. The Constitution's preamble says all. It totally lays it out. Secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. They were willing to die so their children could live free. They built institutions designed to outlast their own lives. Now, I don't know about you, but I think there's a lot of people that think about just themselves rather than their legacy. Number 5, they believed they would answer to God for their choices. The Declaration's final appeal is with the firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. They believed God would judge their cause and their faithfulness to it. Therefore, they believed in divine accountability. We have lost our way in this world, and we don't believe we're going to be held accountable by a God who loves us and designed us and have us function the way that we're supposed to be, to honor and glorify him and make his name great among the nations. When we lose that divine accountability, we lose our actual guidance system. Another thing that they had was corporate responsibility. They understood individual sacrifice serves the collective good. And unfortunately, the collective good has been hijacked in our system by Karl Marx and changed it to mean something that it doesn't mean. Notice what our founders said. We mutually pledge. Not I pledge, but we mutually pledge, and they bonded together. Each man's sacrifice enables others' freedom. And we've lost a sense of actually responsibility to help one another become who we're meant to be. And instead, we've become very selfish in our world. And when you combine transcendent purposes with moral absolutes, sealed by covenant thinking, motivated by legacy consciousness, accountable to divine judgment, and bound by corporate responsibility, you get 56 men who literally cannot break their word even under torture. They pledged it all, my friends, and many gave it all. Now, some of you tonight might be thinking, that's inspiring, Dustin. But did they really pay that price? Well, let me give you some evidence. There were 9 who died from war-related causes. Richard Stockton, the only signer specifically hunted down like a dog and tortured to death. Kidnapped from his actual deathbed, subject to inhumane severity that destroyed his health. He never recovered. John Hart, chased from his dying wife's bedside, lived as a hunted fugitive in forests and caves for over a year. Returned to find his wife dead, children vanished, farm destroyed. Died from exhaustion and a broken heart. Francis Lewis, his wife was kidnapped and tortured to death as revenge for his signature. Elizabeth Lewis died from the effects of her imprisonment. Button Gwinnett died from dual wounds at age 42, making his signature the most valuable today due to its rarity. Joseph Hughes, father of the U.S. Navy, died November 10th, 1779, after a long illness during wartime service. John Morton, first signer to actually die, didn't even live a full year after his name was put on that document. Caesar Rodney made his famous 80-mile midnight ride while dying of facial cancer. The stress of war definitely accelerated his death. Thomas Lynch Jr., lost at sea, presumed dead, one of the most tragic figures among the signers. George Taylor rose from an indentured servant to ironmaster, but his health was destroyed by war-related hardships. Then there are the 12 who had their own homes burned, ransacked, and destroyed. Francis Lure of New York, the British destroyed his home and imprisoned his wife. John Hart of New Jersey, farm and gristmill burned, family scattered. Lewis Morris, his estate looted and burned by British occupation. Philip Livingston lost multiple properties by British forces. William Hopper of North Carolina, home burned to the ground and separated from family. Thomas Nelson Jr., Virginia. Now we'll get that main story in just a minute. Arthur Middleton, South Carolina, property destroyed, returned from prison to find his fortune lost. Thomas Howard Jr., South Carolina, estate damaged, wife dead while he was imprisoned. Lovely. Lyman Hall in Georgia, plantation destroyed during the fall of Savannah. William Floyd, New York, property destroyed during British occupation. Richard Stockton again, New Jersey, property stripped during his torture. Carter Braxton, Virginia, ships captured, had to sell his home to pay debts. Out of the 56 signers, at least 23, that's 41%, paid extreme personal costs. But they all made the same pledge, every single one. Let me give you Thomas Nelson's 6-year journey of sacrifice. Thomas Nelson Jr., because his story shows you how a 6 years of sustained sacrifice commitment actually looks like. 1775 is when the war began, the Revolutionary War. Thomas Nelson is 37 years old at this point, living in Virginia as aristocracy. He's wealthy. He owns massive plantation, has everything to lose. Everything. The Revolutionary War begins at Lexington and Concord in April 19th, 1775. Now, Nelson could have stayed neutral, just like a lot of wealthy people did. It would have been the smart play, the safe play. But that's not what he chose. In 1776, he made the sacred pledge 15 months into war on July 4th, 1776. Nelson puts his signature on the Declaration of Independence at age 38. He pledges his life, his fortune, and sacred honor. Think about this for just a moment. The war has been going on for over a year. They had defeats. They've seen the loss. The outcome is completely uncertain. The British Empire is the most powerful military force on earth at that time. But Nelson signs anyway. But here's what gets me. He had no idea what was coming. None of them really did. They thought maybe it would be a couple more years of war. They had no idea. They were signing up for 6.5 years of sustained sacrifice. 1770 through 1780, the long, hard years of war. For the next 4 years, Nelson kept his commitment. He served in Congress without pay. He used his personal finances to fund Virginia's war effort. He led Virginia's militia all the way through Valley Forge, through defeats, through what seemed like helpless odds. He kept his word. He paid for it himself. In 1781, there was an ultimate test. Now, it was October 1781. Nelson is 43 years old, and he's been keeping his pledge for over 5 years. He's serving as governor of Virginia. The final campaign of the Revolutionary War is happening at Yorktown. American and French forces have trapped the British General Cornwallis on the peninsula. That is it. The battle that will decide everything. And where does Cornwallis set up his headquarters? In Thomas Nelson Jr.'s own mansion. Picture this moment. Nelson is standing right there with George Washington, looking at his family's beautiful home, the house where he had raised his children, where his family had lived for generations, the symbol of everything that he had ever worked for, everything his family had built, and is full of British officers planning to defeat the American cause. What does Nelson do at this point? He turns to Washington and says 5 words that captures everything we're talking about tonight. 5 words. Fire on my house. Shoot it. Put a cannon on it. Start torching it. Can you imagine this man looked at his own home and ordered American cannons to destroy it because it was being used against the cause he pledged everything to support? They fired on it. The house was severely damaged. And on October 19th, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered. The Revolutionary War was over. America had won. The cost was huge. Nelson didn't just lose his house. Over those 6 years, he spent his entire personal fortune, over 30,000 pounds, which is roughly about $9 million in today's money, supporting the war effort. He died poor at the age of 50, having given everything for the cause. But America, the thing he believed in the most, was free. What does this mean today? Friends, this is what keeps me awake at night. The 56 men pledged their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, and literally fulfilled that pledge. 9 died, 12 lost their homes, all risked everything. They created the freest, most prosperous nation in human history through sacrificial commitment, and most Americans today don't even know their names. We live in the freest nation ever created, built on a foundation most of us can't identify. We enjoy rights we can't even name, protected by the Constitution we've never read, established by heroes we've forgotten. And we're losing it all, not because of foreign enemies, because of domestic ignorance, because we don't know what we have. We can't defend it because we don't understand our foundations. We can't maintain our freedoms. Benjamin Franklin prophesied, our prophecy haunts us. A republic, madam, if you can keep it. John Adams warned, our Constitution was made for only a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. The keeping is up to us. That is why Constitution Alive exists, to teach Americans the principles that heroes did to give us. Over the time of the mastermind, which is 10 weeks, we're going to dive deep into the biblical worldview that shaped the founders, the constitutional principles that actually protects our freedoms, how the principles apply to our lives, our families, our communities to today, and what it means to be a citizen who can keep that actual republic. This isn't just a history class. We're going to be learning to think like the founders thought, to understand what they understood, to carry forward what they died to give us. Because Americans need citizens who understand that freedom isn't free. It cost 56 men their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. It cost Thomas Nelson Jr. everything he had. It cost Richard Stockton his life under torture. It cost Francis Lewis his wife. It cost John Hart his family. What will it cost us to keep it? As we close tonight, I want to leave you with the question that has changed my life. What principles are you willing to sacrifice for? The 56 signers had 6 principles that made sacrificial commitment inevitable. Transcendent purpose, moral absolutes, covenantal thinking, legacy consciousness, divine accountability, corporate responsibility. What principles guide your life? These are all types of questions that I help people think through in my coaching process, and I help them identify their purpose in life. Because when we have purpose, we have everything to help us keep going. What will you pledge your sacred honor to defend? Because here's the truth. Free societies are only as strong as the citizens who understand what freedom costs and are willing to pay that price. The 318 way exists to help you discover the principles of your life, to help you excel in faith, family, and freedom, to help you become the kind of leader this nation desperately needs. Constitution Alive may be your next step in your journey. Join us. Learn what they died to give us, because someone who can keep this republic is truly needed at this point. Because as Thomas Nelson Jr. proved, when you pledge your honor to something greater than yourself, you become capable of greatness yourself. Thank you, and God bless. Let's watch tonight's video for some contemplative reflection. All of the video imagery is my own that I've created using AI art, and it will be available on my website, which is coming out soon, www.the and then the number 318 followed by the word way.com. Let's watch the video. Thank you for being a part of tonight's session. We hope that it's really been something that is valuable to you, because this country is worth having, and it's been built upon a sacred covenant. That sacred covenant is something that we need to carry forward in our lives for the next generations. And as has been said, we were given a republic if we can keep it. And we need that moral underpinning to keep us going on the straight and narrow pathway that our Constitution is built on. I encourage you to check out the 10-week mastermind on Constitution Live. You'll find it in the description below. And I encourage you, seriously, check it out. It's going to be a fantastic study. And I'd welcome you to ask any questions in the description below, or get a hold of me on any of my social media channels. Thank you again for taking the time to watch this video. Good night. God bless.